verses 1 through 11. One day as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, the people were crowding around him and listening to the word of God. He saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, and one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little from shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything, but because you say so, I will let down the nets." When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man." For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken. And so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people." So they pulled their boats up on shore, left everything, and followed him. You may be seated.
Imagine if you walked into work tomorrow morning or school or logged in or however you're going, and someone came to you and said, I've got a problem. You have to solve this. You have 1 hour to solve it, and your life depends on it. If you don't solve this problem in 1 hour, you're done. Like, imagine that situation. What do you do? Albert Einstein once said, "If I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on the solution, I would spend the first 55 minutes determining the proper question to ask. For once I know the proper question, I could solve the problem in less than 5 minutes." Ask the right question, you get the right answers. So much of the trouble you and I have in life is that we're asking the wrong questions about things. We're not asking the right questions. And if you don't ask the right questions, you can't get the right answers. When it comes to spiritual growth, I think one of the things in particular that messes with you and with me, that keeps us from growing spiritually, is that we don't ask the right questions a lot of times about faith and about what it means to have faith. We ask questions like, do you believe in Jesus? Or what do you believe about Jesus? Have you been saved? And those aren't really the right questions. They're not really the best questions for spiritual growth. Those are like one-time, momentary type questions. They're not the deepest questions. They're not questions that push us forward and closer to growth and to expansion of our faith. So when it comes to spiritual growth, we've got to learn to ask questions that are a little more penetrating, that push us further, that take us to the answers that Jesus is trying to give us. And I think this passage, what Darlene just read, is a great example of that for us. There's a question Jesus is answering, and we've got to learn to ask the question Jesus is answering in order to get it and understand it and see what it means to really follow him. Because the question Jesus is answering is more about what it means to follow him, to believe in him. And I love this story because I think it has all the pieces of what it means and what it takes to follow Jesus built into it. So let's look, where do we start? We start with an encounter with Jesus. And at this point, they had met Jesus. Simon, who's Peter, same person, I'm going to call him Peter. They had known Jesus. He'd been in their town a couple times at least now. They'd seen him in the synagogue, heard him teaching about God's kingdom and how God was bringing about transformation for the world. They'd heard that. They'd seen Jesus heal people and drive out evil spirits. Peter had had Jesus in his home. Jesus had healed his mother-in-law and eaten his food. So they've been around Jesus. But when Jesus stepped into Peter's boat, that's when Jesus really stepped into Peter's world. Because Peter was a fisherman. Every night, Peter would go out and throw his nets out into that giant lake, so big we call it a sea, and fish. Every night, he would ride the waves of that sea and learn when it's getting violent and when it's calm, and learn where should the fish be now and where should they be then. And he would learn, and he would pull and throw those nets, and every day his hands would be rubbed raw and calloused from working with those nets and fishing. Jesus stepped into Peter's world when he stepped into that boat. And Jesus messed with Peter's world. This is the one area where Peter was the expert. Peter knew more than Jesus about fishing. Peter did it every day of his life. Jesus grew up learning to be a carpenter. This is the one place where Peter could have said, you know what? I'm the pro here. You just go sit down and be quiet. We know what we're doing. We know that there's no good fishing tonight. We tried it all night. There's no fish. We know when to quit. Now's the time to quit. There's no way we're going to get any fish. Standing there and telling them, oh, no, go out and fish again is like walking up to a carpenter who's trying to do a compound miter cut in a corner and telling him, oh, no, why don't you just flip the wood around a couple times and then it'll probably work. Anybody who's done carpentry knows that's stupid. Don't bother me. Just go keep watching your YouTube videos while I actually do this thing. So they'd been fishing all night. They'd come up empty. The sea had nothing for them. It was a dead night. It was hopeless to keep trying. It didn't make sense. And then Jesus steps into their boat, into Peter's boat. And suddenly, what had been a dead night with no fish comes alive in a way they'd never experienced before. Suddenly, what was empty becomes full. Suddenly, what was hopeless becomes the greatest moment of their lives as fishermen. And that's when Peter knew. That's when Peter knew that Jesus, who he had seen speaking in the synagogue, who he'd had into his home, who he'd had eating his food, who'd healed his mother-in-law, but this is the moment when Peter knew that Jesus is divine. He's God. This is when the encounter with Jesus becomes deeply personal for Peter because Jesus stepped into his world when he stepped onto that boat. Now Peter can connect. Now Peter gets it. Now Peter can see if Jesus has power over the fish, wow, what does that mean about who he is? And what Jesus did in that boat on a small scale with Peter, if you step back and think about it, Jesus steps into a place that is hopeless, where it's dead, it's empty. What he did on a small scale for Peter by helping him catch all those fish is what Jesus was doing on a large scale for the world. He had stepped into a world that was hopeless, that there was no life, there was no future, and Jesus was bringing new life and fullness here. And listen, it's one thing to believe that. Yes, I believe that about Jesus. I believe that that's who he is. I believe that that's what he did. It's one thing to believe it. It's another thing to experience it. It's another thing to encounter Jesus. Right? Peter had seen all this stuff, and he had ideas about Jesus. But now he's encountering Jesus, and that changes things. Asking, do you believe in Jesus? The way we talk about belief nowadays, because when we say belief nowadays, like, all right, I'm going to throw Christina under the bus. We've had the conversation many times about, do you believe it's important to be on time? And she says, yes, I believe it's important to be on time. And she'll tell you she's gotten much better than she used to be, and it's probably somewhat true. But for me to stand here and say, I believe it's very important to be on time for things is one thing. For me to be on time is another. To make sure I'm always on time or even early is another thing. I believe it's important to eat well and exercise. I believe that with all my head, my mouth. So we have this relationship with belief that's not right? And so that's why I'm pushing this way today, because our belief doesn't line up with action, and that can't be. When it comes to following Jesus, we have to ask questions that break that and that let us realize that belief and trust in Jesus means something deeper than just a set of things I think. And asking what a real belief is, what Jesus is answering here. This passage is telling us what it means to really believe and follow Jesus looks like. In order to have that encounter, it takes inviting Jesus to step onto your boat. And so the first thing you've got to do, the first thing what they do is say, Jesus, get into my boat. If you're following along in our app today, you can just pull that up and that's there. Jesus, get into my boat. And I know most of you listening to me, whether you're home listening or here listening, participating, I know most of you hearing my voice now know that. And most of you have done that. You've asked Jesus to step into your boat, to step into your life. And maybe there's friends, though, who you can talk to about this and you can explain, look, it's not just about a set of things I believe or a set of things I'll do and not do. It's an encounter I've had with Jesus. It's different. I've asked him to step into my boat. I've asked him to step into my life. And look, if you tell them this story, a lot of your friends will say, well, sure. I mean, if asking Jesus to step in my life means that all of a sudden I'm going to be like super successful in my career, then Jesus, get in the boat. If having Jesus in my boat means that I'm going to get a call from my bank tomorrow that says, sir, we've got a problem. There's not enough room in our vault to hold your money, and it's breaking the walls of our vault. So we have to call a bank down the road, so we're going to put some of your money there. Is that okay? Like, if that's what having Jesus in my boat means, then by all means, Jesus, get in my boat. Jesus, stay in my boat. Don't ever leave my boat. Only that's not Peter's response. Peter asked Jesus to get into his boat, lets him get into his boat. But then when this happens, Peter's response is, okay, Jesus, here's what we're going to do. We'll call it Jesus and Friends Fishing, and we're going to set up a whole new thing here. That's not what he does. He tells Jesus, get out of my boat. What? That's weird. Why would he do that? Verse 8 rather. He says, go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man. Listen to me. If you have an encounter with Jesus and you walk away thinking, wow, following Jesus means that, I'm going to get this and this and this, and it's all going to go so well for me, and you start getting excited about the stuff you're going to get for you, you haven't had an encounter with Jesus. When you have an encounter with Jesus, in my personal experience, and then everything I read in Scripture, those who encounter Jesus, whether you go all the way back to the Old Testament, all the way through the New to today, what happens is they fall on their face. Abraham, Moses, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Peter, Paul, all of them, you fall on your face because you are struck with the awesomeness and the holiness of God. And so then they say things like, oh no, oh no, I'm in trouble. I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be in your presence, God. You need to go away from me because I don't belong in your presence. That's what I see. That's what I read. That's what it means to encounter Jesus' presence. Have you ever felt his presence that way? In a way that it begins to expose you and shine a light on the things in your life that you feel guilt and shame over, that shines a light in such a way that makes you say, Jesus, please take your light and shine it somewhere else for a little while. Get it off of me. Have you ever felt that? And I've had these moments and in all different kinds of places. The place doesn't matter. I've experienced these moments at altars. I've experienced these moments at home alone. I've experienced these moments with groups of people in worship on retreats. I've experienced this moment alone in the woods where I'm convicted of this and realize that he is holy and I'm not, and I encounter him, and it makes me want to say, you really need to go away from me. I've experienced it walking through the city. I've experienced it bobbing on a lake in a kayak. It doesn't matter where you are. You can experience and encounter Jesus. And when you ask him to get into your boat, you're going to encounter him, and the effect it's going to have on you is this deep conviction that he is holy and I'm broken, and I don't deserve to be in his presence. And this fear will start to well up inside of you. And that's a crucial part of what it means to follow Jesus. Which I know is weird and ironic to think that part of following Jesus means wanting him to go away from you and asking him to leave. But I think that until you and I have felt that feeling, I don't think we're actually ready to follow Jesus because we don't know what it really means. Honestly, I think that a humbling encounter with Jesus has to be a regular occurrence in the lives of those who are truly following him. Not just something that happened one time, but regularly we're realizing he is holy, I am not. I don't deserve to be in his presence. There have to be regular moments when I recognize that and I come face to face with that truth, and it makes me cry, and I realize I am spiritually bankrupt. Jesus said, happy are the people who realize they're spiritual bankrupt and mourn about it, because now you're in the place where you can actually start to follow Jesus without pretense, without anything in the way. You can put all that stuff aside because you've encountered him and realized he's holy and you're not. So belief starts, right? What's the right question? What does it look like when you and I really believe in Jesus and follow him? Right? What does belief look like? Not just what do you believe. What does it look like? What does it show up as? And what it is one, you ask Jesus, get into my boat, and you obey him. And then it says, get out of my boat because I don't deserve to be in your presence. And then imagine if the story ended there. That would be pretty sad, wouldn't it? You get to the point where you realize that God is holy and Jesus is just so other than you and you don't really deserve him. And then imagine the story ending there. Because it does end there for a lot of people. For a lot of people, that's as far as they get. And then they think, I can't be around God. I can't go to church. I can't be around Jesus. I don't deserve it. And they end the story there. As though Jesus is the kind of person who would do what you and I would do. If that's me and I'm, the Son of God who's created the world and the world's rebelled against me and I come and I'm here to set people free and I make this miraculous catch a fish happen to Peter and Peter's like, oh, I don't deserve to be in your presence. Me, I'm going to be like, that's right, you don't deserve to be in my presence, and I'm going to get out of the boat and walk to the shore on the water because, that's the way you and I are. We want to win the argument. But that's not what Jesus does. Jesus looks at Peter and he reassures him. He tells him, the second half of verse 10, he says, fear not. Don't be afraid. I understand why you're afraid. And that fear is not inappropriate. But don't be afraid. I have not come to destroy you and ruin you. I have come to give you new life. I've come to invite you into a new purpose. And he tells him, from now on, you're going to fish for people. You're going to be a fisher of people. I call this, and the first service we all concurred, this is probably corny, but I call this Fishin' Impossible. I know it's corny, but stay with me. What Jesus is telling Peter here is, I'm not here to destroy you and ruin you. I'm here to call you to be a partner with me for something I call, not Jesus, I call it Fishin' Impossible. What does it mean to believe in Jesus? That's the question. That's the right question, because that opens us up to Jesus' answer. Because Jesus' answer is, believing in me means you partner with me in my Fishin' Impossible mission. What does that all mean? What does it mean to fish for people? There's something you need to know about this catch of fish that you probably, the first few times you read the story, it's hard to know. And actually, I didn't realize this until I was sitting there by the shore of the lake of Capernaum, Gennesaret, same name, and sitting there with someone, a good friend of mine who lives there, and we were talking about this, and he told us why that's so amazing. See, these guys fished, I don't know if you noticed it, but they fished at night. When Jesus says, hey, let's go back out in the deep end, they're like, Jesus, we've been fishing all night long. Well, why? Why were they fishing at night? Is it because his mother-in-law snored? Why were they at night fishing? And here's why. It's because they used a kind of net called a trammel net, which is invisible at night. You can't see it in the dark. The fish wouldn't see it. But during the daytime, the fish could see it. And so they didn't use them during the daytime because it wouldn't work. They fished at night because they had chambers and the fish had to unwittingly go through all the chambers and then they'd be trapped in there and they couldn't get out. But they only did these at night because they could be seen during the day and it just wouldn't work during the day, which means that this catch of fish is not just, oh, wow, that's pretty cool. It was impossible. It wasn't possible because the fish would see the net. And it wasn't just, oh, we scoop some fish up. It was, we drop this net and the fish have to all go in it. And they're not going to go in it because it's visible. They can see it. They know what's going to happen. It was impossible for this to happen. It was miraculous for this to happen. That's why Peter falls on his face and says, get away from me because I'm unrighteous. I don't deserve to be in your presence. And that's why I call this fishing impossible, because Jesus first demonstrated that the impossible can be done through him when that catch of fish happened. But then he calls Peter not just to believe that that's true, not just to, yep, Jesus, I acknowledge in my mind that that's true, but to then partner with Jesus in doing something even more impossible than catching fish in the Sea of Galilee with trammel nets during the daytime. He called them to join him in fishing for men. And I've always wrestled with what that meant. It's actually always bothered me, fish for men, because if I understand fishing correctly, and I haven't gone fishing much, but if I understand correctly, you catch the fish, you take it out of the water, and the fish dies. Am I missing something? And that to me never seemed like a great analogy for what Jesus was doing. Come with me and we're going to kill some people. No, that can't be what he meant. So I've wrestled with that. What does he mean when he says, come with me and we're going to go fishing for men and women? And then it hit me. Fish belong in the sea. People don't. People don't belong in the sea. And if you drop something in the sea that doesn't belong there, what are you going to do? You're going to fish it out to rescue it, to save it. Men drown in the sea. They sink and they die in the sea. And then I began to think about all of Scripture, and what I've learned in reading is that the sea and the ocean were constantly seen as chaos, as representative of chaos and evil and danger to men, and dry ground was seen as order and beauty and safety for men. And so there's this idea whenever you're talking about the ocean that sits there, at least in their culture, and we should see it too, that when you're talking about the sea, you're talking about chaos and evil. And so what Jesus is saying is he's come to pull men and women out of the chaos of sin and evil in this world because it's drowning them and they can't breathe and they don't even know it. And that might seem like fishing impossible, but with Jesus it's possible. And that's what Jesus came to do. And not only that, but Jesus wants partners. That's also amazing. Because up till now in Luke's gospel, Jesus has been doing everything on his own. But here in the middle of this section, Luke puts this story to show that Jesus doesn't just want people to see the things he does and hear the things he says and then say, okay, yeah, I'm on your team, G, I believe in you. He wants partners with him who will join him in doing what he's here to do and joining this impossible mission. So, we're asking the right question. We're not just saying, what do you believe about Jesus or do you believe in him? We're saying, what does it mean? What does it look like to believe in Jesus, to follow Jesus? And it looks like, get into my boat, Jesus. I want to follow you. I want you to lead me. And then it looks like, get out of my boat, Jesus. I don't deserve to have you here. And then it looks like, you know what? Get me out of my boat, Jesus, and onto your boat. I want to get on your boat. I'm going to get out of my boat. I'm going to get on your boat. I want to partner with you in what you're doing in this world. Get into my boat, Jesus. Get out of my boat, Jesus. Get me into your boat, Jesus. It has to go all the way to partnership. That's what real following means. And that's what Peter and his friends do. Verse 11 says, they pulled their boats up on the shore, and they left everything, and they followed him. I just think about that for a minute. They just had the most successful moment of their career. They just caught the biggest catch of fish they'd ever seen anyone ever catch. Other boats have to come help them, right? Like, this is incredible. The biggest moment of their life and their career. And if Jesus would just stay with them, man, every day could be like this. Imagine the money you could make. And after this most successful moment, they get up and they walk away. And that tells me something else. I think the story screams something else about what it really means to follow Jesus. And listen to me as I say this. Try and just let these words soak in. Partners don't follow Jesus because of the impossible things he'll do for them. Partners don't follow Jesus because of the impossible things they want him to do for them. If your relationship with Jesus is all about him doing impossible things for you, then you're not a follower, you're a leader trying to lead him along. Believers become partners with Jesus when they follow Jesus for the impossible things that he's going to do through them. Let me say that again. Believers become partners with Jesus when they follow him for the impossible things he's going to do through them in this world and in other people's lives. They're going to walk in a partnership with him, in a relationship with him. That's what we learn here. I am fascinated with the boat theme in Peter's life. Think about Peter's life and think about some of the stories you know from the Bible and how often boats are involved with Peter. Here in the beginning of Peter's story, we have the boat. And Jesus gets into Peter's boat, and then in the end, Peter's like, get out of my boat. And then in the end, Peter gets out of his boat, and he leaves it behind to follow Jesus. And then at some point in the middle of their story, Peter and the guys are on the boat, and Jesus isn't. But as they're going across the lake in the dark of night, all of a sudden, Jesus is walking on the water. And they see him, and Peter, again, gets out of the boat and walks to Jesus. So strong is his faith in Christ. And then at the end of Peter's life, after Jesus died, do you remember what they did? Peter and the guys got back in their boat and went fishing. And as they're out there fishing, they were fishing again through the night and didn't catch anything. And the risen Jesus walks up on the shore and calls out to them, hey, guys, catch anything? No. Why don't you, just try to throw the nets on the other side of the boat? I'm sure that'll work. I read it in a book somewhere. And so they throw the nets on the other side of the boat, and all of a sudden their nets are so full of fish that they're ripping and tearing. They have to call other boats over to come and help them. And Peter sees and recognizes, that's Jesus, my risen Lord. And what does he do that time? He dives out of his boat. He dives out of his boat, swims to shore to Jesus, and he gets on Jesus' boat and never leaves it. He's on Jesus' boat from that day until his last day. He dives out of his boat when he sees the risen Jesus and encounters him. And I think if you and I would learn to ask the right question, what happens when we believe in Jesus? What does it look like when we believe in Jesus? What does it mean to follow Jesus? What we'll see is it means asking him into our boat, then realizing we don't deserve to have him in our boat. But then dive out of your boat and climb on board with him and his mission and what he's doing, into this partnership with him, because that's what it means to follow Jesus. It means that we become not just a believer in him, but a partner with him in what he's doing in this world. And look, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to put your hammer down tomorrow if you're a carpenter, or put your stethoscope down if you're a doctor of some sort, or put down your computer or your trowel or whatever the tools are that you work with every day. It doesn't mean that you have to walk in and put that down tomorrow and then leave. But it does mean that your agenda and your boat, if it's going in a way that's different than Jesus, it's time for you to abandon ship and jump out and swim to Jesus' boat and climb in and partner with him. And the way we each partner with him isn't going to be the same. There's going to be different ways you and I each partner with him based on his particular calling in our lives. You know, a lot of people became followers of Jesus in that town. Only a handful of them actually left that town and went around with Jesus. But many others stayed back and continued to partner with Jesus by building the church there. And we know that because Peter's house became the church in that town, and we can see how they kept expanding it and making it bigger. It's bigger than all the other houses there. We can see how they kept expanding it as the church grew. They stayed there and kept following Jesus and kept partnering with Jesus. So it can look different in each of our lives. But what will not be different, what will be the same for each of us, is that we'll have this moment where we let Jesus into our boat and then realize that we don't deserve to have him in our boat when we encounter him. And then we're going to jump out of our boat and join him in the mission that he's doing. This is what it means to follow him. Worship team, would you come back? It means that we leave our agenda behind and we partner with Jesus. We step out into this adventure. Right? We don't just head to the shore and try to be safe, but we allow Jesus to call us out onto the ocean. Becoming a follower of Jesus is not just about Jesus rescuing you from the ocean and putting you safe on the beach so you're secure. That's not the end of it. Because what Jesus then does is he calls us out onto the waves. He calls us out to join him. Not just so we can have a great experience, but so that we can help him pull people out. Grab a hold of the net wherever you are. Grab the net that Jesus is pulling people out of the chaos of sin and death in this world. Grab the net and start pulling. Because that's what it means to follow Jesus, that we partner with him. That's the adventure he calls you and me into. And I don't know what that's going to look like in your life this week. But as we sing this song, I want you to do a couple things. I want you to, one, pray for Jesus to show you. What does it mean Jesus, what does it mean for me to partner with you? That's the right question. What will it look like for me to partner with you in my life and follow your agenda and become a fisher of people with you? And then pray for the courage, pray for the bravery to do it.